Yeah, yeah, yeah. All right. Okay, today, sure, when you're going to be kicked out of class. All right, let's be serious here. Yeah, yeah. You're the instigator. We know that. All right, today's the last day of the Secretary General's visit to India. This morning, he met Prime Minister Modi, also participated in the launch of the Lifestyles for the Environment initiative, which took place at the Statue of Unity in Ekta Nagar in Narmada. The Secretary General emphasized that in these perilous times for the planet, we need all hands on deck. He stressed that all of us as individuals, as communities, can and must be part of the solution of protecting our planet and our collective future. The Secretary General added that overconsumption is at the root of the triple planetary emergency of climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution. We're using the equivalent of 1.6 Earths to maintain our lifestyle. After the event, Mr. Guterres headed to Modera, the first solar village in India, with a population of about 6,400 people. He interacted with the community and saw firsthand the impact that solar power is having on them. The Secretary General is on his way now to Vietnam, where tomorrow he will meet with the General Secretary of the Communist Party, the state president. He will also take part in a ceremony to commemorate the 45th anniversary of Vietnam's membership to the UN. The Secretary General, the Security Council this morning is discussing strengthening women's resilience and leadership as path to peace in regions plagued by armed groups. The Deputy Secretary General, Amina Mohammed, briefed council members on our work on that subject. She said that we cannot separate the perilous state of peace in our world from the destructive effects of patriarchy and the silencing of women's voices. We must call out misogyny as it manifests itself in the abuse and discrimination that women confront, she said, but we must also challenge the social, political, and economic structures and norms that sustain it. Her remarks were shared with you. A number of updates from the African continent. First on Chad, following questions I received. I can tell you that we are concerned about the violence in the context of the demonstrations that we've seen in Chad today. Those demonstrations have reportedly led to the loss of life and injuries. We call on the authorities to ensure that the security, safety, and human rights of all Chadians, including the right of freedom of expression, peaceful assembly, and association, are respected. We also call on all parties to refrain from violence or excessive use of force and to remain committed to the spirit of dialogue in the interest of peace and stability in the country. The United Nations has also expressed its solidarity with the population impacted by severe floods throughout the country, and we call on international partners to continue to provide assistance to Chad during this unprecedented natural catastrophe. In Burkina Faso, Martin Griffiths, whose name was just invoked, is there today. Earlier in the day, he visited the town of Djibo in the country's north. Hundreds of thousands of people have sought safety there due to what Mr. Griffiths called a devastating conflict and the impact of dangerously changing climate. While in Djibo, he met with community leaders and displaced people and said he received 3 simple requests from them. First, to reopen the roads by which food and other critical supplies enter the town. Second, to provide aid to both displaced people and the host communities. And lastly, to end the conflict, that people can go home and their children can finally have a future. He noted that Djibo, which is usually a busy market town, but currently the stalls are empty and there is no food. As we mentioned to you before, some 4.9 million men, women, and children in Burkina Faso need urgent assistance. This year's humanitarian appeal for the country is only 33% funded. We need more money to help people, and we need it now. Martin Griffiths is there in Burkina for a one-day visit. He'll be meeting also top government officials, members of the diplomatic community, and humanitarian workers, and we hope to have him here in the flesh next week, so he can speak to you about his trip to Burkina. Speaking of floods that have impacted Chad, I want to move to Nigeria, where the worst flooding in a decade is impacting more than 2.8 million men, women, and children, and that's according to Nigerian authorities. According to them, over 600 people have died, 1.3 million people have been displaced. The southeastern state of Anambra is the most affected. We're gravely concerned by the flooding that will worsen an already alarming food insecurity, malnutrition situation in Nigeria. More than 440,000 hectares of farmland have been partially or totally damaged at a time when more than 19 million people across Nigeria are facing severe food insecurity. Cereal production is likely to be declined by 3.4% compared to last year due to flooding, high agricultural costs, and insecurity. That's according to FAO. Since July, national authorities in Nigeria have provided food, non-food items, and clean drinking water to thousands of impacted households. We, along with our humanitarian partners, are supporting the government with assessments and response, notably in Borno, Adamawa, and Yobe states, as well as other impacted parts of Nigeria. We've provided emergency shelter kits and are working to create local water drains, sandbags, and walling around shelter to mitigate the impact of the flooding. Moving on to peacekeeping, this time in the Central African Republic, our blue-helmeted colleagues there have deployed a team to the town of Sam-Wanja in Haute-Koto Prefecture, during which 13 combatants, including 11 people from the FPRC rebel group and 2 from the UPC group, were disarmed and demobilized, and a number of weapons, including rockets and grenades, and over 1,500 pieces of ammunition were recovered. As part of its mandate to build the capacity of security forces, the UN mission is also currently supporting the process of recruiting 1,000 national police, including the next phase of testing, nearly 1,400 candidates in Bangui and the regions, and the mission also continues to support the Central African Armed Forces in securing the country by carrying out more than 1,300 patrols over the last week. This included an operation that is ongoing for more than 3 weeks in Jangba in Basse-Koto Prefecture on the border with the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Since the start of the operation, 12 bridges have been rehabilitated or repaired by UN peacekeepers, supporting movements of trade, people, and humanitarian goods. And in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, our peacekeeping mission there is telling us that communities in Komanda, outside of Bunia in the Ituri province, have resumed their normal activities and movements in the area. This follows the signing of a cessation of hostilities, agreements between armed groups, the Patriotic Integrationist Front of the Congo, or the FPIC, and the government that was agreed to in June of this year. The agreement was facilitated by UN peacekeepers. As a reminder, a little over a year ago, several attacks perpetrated by different armed groups, including the ADF, the Mai Mai, and the FPIC, were reported in Komanda. The cessation of hostilities agreement, combined with protection efforts by the Congolese army and the mission, are helping to reassure communities. Those efforts include joint operations against the ADF in Mount Hoyo, outside of Komanda, as well as daily patrols by Blue Helmets. Meanwhile, the mission reports that it's also increased and intensified patrols around sites for internally displaced people in the Bule area, that's northeast of Jugu in Ituri, to prevent the Codeco armed groups from attacking displaced men, women, and children. And moving up north and east in Somalia, our humanitarian colleagues are telling us that the humanitarian response plan has been revised to reflect more accurately the worsening situation and rising needs of Somalis. Humanitarian needs have skyrocketed, and the response plan now targets 7.6 million people. That's a 40% increase since January. Donors have made generous contributions of just over $1 billion so far this year, or 46% of the $2.26 billion revised appeal. This has allowed us to reach about 6.5 million people across Somalia with some form of humanitarian assistance. With the worsening situation, an additional $1 billion will be needed to deliver life-saving assistance by the end of December into early next year. Funding arrived late this year, and this hopefully will be avoided in 2023 as humanitarians focus on saving lives and averting famine. There is a critical need to invest in livelihoods, resilience, infrastructure development, climate adaptation, and durable solutions. You saw that last night we issued a statement in which the Secretary General said he was saddened to learn of the loss of dozens of lives and damage to infrastructure in Venezuela due to floods, mudslides, and resulting in heavy rainy season and the impact of tropical storms. We are providing support in coordination with national authorities' emergency response to address the needs of the most affected people. The Secretary General expresses solidarity with the people and government of Venezuela. 1:15 here, there will be a briefing by Alexandra Santaki, the Special Rapporteur in the field of cultural rights, very important rights. Tomorrow, we'll have a bit of fodder for you. David Gressley, our resident coordinator for Yemen, will be here in the flesh to brief you on the situation. Siga, as they say in Greece. Just calm down. To brief you on the situation in Yemen. At 1 p.m., there will be a briefing here by Dr. David Boyd, the Special Rapporteur on the issue of human rights obligations relating to the enjoyment of a safe, clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. Betul.
Thank you, Steph. 2 questions. Yesterday, Russia's deputy UN ambassador told us that he was not too optimistic about extending and expanding the grain deal. What is your reaction? And also, he said that if the UNSG sends UN experts to Ukraine to inspect the downed drones, then Russia would reassess its cooperation with the SG. Does that worry the SG about the future of the grain deal? What is your reaction to that? Thanks.
On the grain deal, I'll reiterate what I said yesterday, is that discussions are going on with all the parties concerned. We're not going to do a play-by-play as those discussions are going on. We're trying to reach the goal, which is an extended grain deal, also the increased facilitation of trade on Russian fertilizer and grain, and we're continuing to try to reach that goal.
And my second question? That they would reassess their cooperation with the SG?
It's not for me to comment on what the deputy PR said. Thank you. Sherwin, and then we'll move down the line.
So let's follow up on that. So you say it's not for you to comment, but what would the implications be, right? I've asked you a lot about the strenuous nature of the relationship with the Russian Federation. The Secretary General has been unequivocal in his criticism of Russia's violations of the UN Charter, international law. The Russians have not been very happy with that criticism, going as far as to say they will reassess the relationship with the UN Secretariat and the Secretary General in particular. What are the implications of a reassessed relationship with Russia?
I think you can do the analysis of what the implications are. It is clear that the Secretary General has spoken out very clearly about the war in Ukraine, about the Russian actions in Ukraine. What he has said has been based on international law, based on principles within the Charter. That has not stopped our continued discussions with the Russian Federation on a number of issues relating to the conflict, on top of all of the other issues that we deal with all member states and especially members of the Security Council.
Ambassador Polyansky said specific things, that the UN Secretariat would have no mandate and would not have the expertise to investigate the veracity of claims that these drones, that there was a transfer of drones from Iran to Russia that are being used in Ukraine. Does the US have the expertise, and does it have a mandate in terms of Resolution 2231?
We base our actions and our doings on resolutions that are passed and instructions that are given to us. There was a note from the President of the Security Council in 2016 relating to this, and we follow those instructions. But I think as importantly, we don't prejudge anything. So,
one more before I yield to James. He also suggested, did Ambassador Polyansky, that the Secretary General merely rubber-stamped information that was given to the Secretariat by Western countries. How do you respond to a claim that there is a bias within the Secretariat in favor of Western nations, particularly as it relates to Ukraine?
The Secretary General's action is the Secretariat's action in all of its scope, right, from A to Z, is based on the Charter and based on instructions given to us from member states, and is done without prejudice.
On the possible investigation, which you say is currently under discussion, you say that there was a previous letter from a president of the Security Council in 2016. There is also precedent, is there not, of the investigation that took place in Saudi Arabia in 2020. Is there anything different from what the UN did then to what the UN might do now that would prevent you from doing an investigation?
There's a lot of may and might, which I will not follow you on. I mean, as relating to 2231, as I said, there's a note from the President of the Security Council. I'll love to give you document symbol, so I will, S/2016/44, which includes biannual reports of the Secretary General in relation to Security Council Resolution 2231 from 2015. As I said yesterday, we are ready to analyze any information brought to the attention of the Secretariat by member states. And the rest is not for me to go on further.
Okay. Following up from Denise Brown, I think it was very clear that she made it clear that the Ukrainian government and military are cooperating with her office, giving them access unless there's some specific military reason on that occasion, and absolutely no cooperation whatsoever in what she described as non-government held areas, but what were separatist areas and what now are areas controlled and annexed by the Russian Federation. Can you tell us how concerned the Secretary General is about this? You mentioned, or she mentioned, Martin Griffiths is leading on this. What is actually going on? And is it time for the Secretary General to be as clear as Denise Brown was and call out the Russian Federation on this?
Well, I mean, I think, Secretary, we've always been clear in our reports, which are often sent out in the name of the Secretary General, that we've expressed extreme concern at the inability, especially in recent months, and before that it was challenging, but it was done, of doing cross-line convoys. And I think Denise said it and said it in a very clear way. There are people who need help, right? Our efforts are trying to reach those people. As she mentioned, Martin Griffiths has been leading on a lot of this work, and as soon as we're able to do what we would like to do and reach the people we need, we will tell you.
If I may, a last question on access in Ukraine, although I have more questions which perhaps you'll come back to me later on. But the fact-finding mission on Olenevka, one, is there any news on that? I'm guessing no, because you haven't read anything out. So can I be really clear on that? Are you getting permission to go where you want from the Ukrainian government? One. Are you getting permission to go where you want from the Russian government too?
We're waiting to get.
Could you answer one, then two?
Let me. You can ask questions the way you want it, and let me answer the question the way I want it. It'll be our division of labor here.
So 1 and 2.
Yes. Sorry. No, this is a very serious matter. We have been in touch with the Ukrainians and with the Russian Federation. We are awaiting the green lights from the Russian side in terms of security and in terms of access.
So you have the green light from the Ukrainian side.
This is
the Russian side.
Those are the things we're waiting for. Edith Lederer.
Thank
Associated
you.
Press.
A couple of follow-ups. First, on note 44 on resolution 2231, you said that the Secretariat would analyze any information brought to the United Nations. The ambassador from Ukraine said in the letter sent to the Secretary General that he wants to see an investigative team go to Ukraine to look at what is your response to that specific request from the Ukrainian ambassador?
Well, we've read the letter. We're continuing to look at the letter. There are discussions going on. I think Rosemary DiCarlo briefed the council yesterday. But at this point, I'm not going to go any further than to say that we will analyze any information brought to our attention by member states.
A couple of other follow-ups. First, on Burkina Faso, I believe you said that the appeal was 33% funded, but I did not hear a figure for how big the appeal is. And also, on the whole issue of the grain deal, today in Geneva, Russia's ambassador to Geneva, Gennady Gatilov, gave a press conference and said, and I quote, "There is no point in continuing an agreement, one part of which may come out as dead on arrival." So, of course, the Russian authorities will be seriously considering the future of the extension of this grain deal. I heard what you said earlier, but isn't the United Nations concerned that the Ukrainian end of the deal could come to a screeching halt?
I mean, we're working hard to ensure that nothing comes to a screeching halt, and that what has been agreed to will be expanded and extended. As I told Betul, I mean, there's a lot of discussions going on. For us, it's not the time for public diplomacy. So you will have to, unfortunately for you, bear with me. Mr. Vacara, and then we'll come back.
Thank you, Stéphane. Berlusconi, that he's the leader of a party that he's forming with other parties, a new government in Italy, said yesterday, or at least it was caught on tape, saying that practically blames Ukraine president for pushing President Putin to invade Ukraine. Does this could concern the Secretary General of this interpretation of the events?
I'm not going to do color commentary on what Mr. Berlusconi may have said about the situation in Ukraine. Edith, to tell you, because it wasn't in my note, and that's why you didn't hear it, the Burkina appeal for 2022 is $805 million. Betul.
Thank you, Steph. Two follow-ups. My first question is, I just need a clarification. Does the SG have a mandate or not to send experts to Ukraine? Can you clarify that?
I will refer you to that note, and you should quote from it, because that's better than me trying to repeat what it says.
And I have a second follow-up on Edie's question. Yes, you answered our question, but you said that it's not time for public diplomacy, but there are a lot of people who are worried about the future of this agreement. Isn't it fair for them to have some sort of transparency to know what is really going on, and if the negotiations are going well or not?
The transparency from our part has been telling you what our goal is, right? The Secretary General believes, and that's his way of practicing, that sometimes to get to those goals, you need to be a bit more discreet. Sometimes, to continue with the submarine analogy, the periscope will come up and we'll get some air. But right now, for our part, and the parties are free, and everybody has different goals, and we'll speak and say what they want. For our part, we will remain more discreet. But that doesn't mean that it should not be interpreted as a lack of deep determination from the Secretary General and his team to continue with an initiative that has alleviated the suffering of millions of people around the world.
If I may have one more follow-up on the grain deal. Polyansky also said that it was not the sanctions impacting the exports of Russian products, Russian grain, but the indirect effects, and in this case, which is the overcompliance of Western companies, and this is their concern. Just wondering if the SG shares the same concern about the overcompliance from the Western companies.
What I can tell you is, and I've been with the Secretary General when he's made those calls, is that he is working extremely diligently, in extremely determined fashion, to do whatever he can do in contacts with the US, the EU, the UK, and others to facilitate the trade in fertilizer and food, which, as a matter of fact, is not subject to sanctions. But that's why we're talking about facilitation of trade. James, and then Stéphane will take another whack at me.
Just for the record first, the UK has its, well,
Yes.
looks like it's about to have its third Prime Minister in 2 months. There seems to be political turmoil in the country. Is the UN worried about the stability of a P5 country?
No. No. Nice try.
Okay. Next, following up some reporting from the Associated Press, there is a major investigation now underway, and the AP have seen various confidential documents and messages and other material into the head of the World Health Organization in Syria, Dr. Akjamal Majtimova, allegations of abusive behavior, fraud, corruption in this investigation. First, how concerned is the Secretary General into what's been going on in Damascus?
I can tell you that he's fully confident that the World Health Organization, which is as they've telling us, engaged in a protracted and complex investigation, will follow through, in ensuring that not only the programs in Syria, but that public monies are used appropriately.
But as you know, Steph, this isn't the first time there have been controversy and allegations about the way the humanitarian operation in Syria has been conducted. For example, you know, all of them are based there in the Four Seasons Hotel. Apparently the latest figures, $70 million has been spent by the UN on the Four Seasons Hotel, 14 million in the last year, a hotel that is controlled by a crony of President Assad. Does he not now need to open a much wider investigation into the way the UN humanitarian system has been working in Syria?
I think you're linking things that are not. You're linking the AP's reporting with other things. I mean, the WHO story, very clear, and I've commented on it.
But the question is there a link, and should there be a wider investigation?
Let me answer the question. We work in Syria, like we work in many other countries, with full cooperation, and I should say permission of sovereign governments, right? Syria is also a very complex situation, security situation. There are only certain places where I think our staff is able to stay, and I can tell you that the programs are regularly audited and publicly reported on. We'll go to Stefano, and then Michelle, and then I'm going to lunch.
Thank you, Stéphane. Let me try again. The New York Times just has an headline saying Berlusconi caught on tape gushing over Putin heightens anxiety about Italy. So my question is about the concern of the Secretary General. Is there an important country, main country in the European Union that so far has been very supportive of anything that the Secretary General said about the defense of the Charter on the case of Ukraine and so on, and voted all the resolutions condemnation and invasion. All of a sudden have somebody that he's practically, maybe his party will have the foreign minister, at least for the last news, his party will have his foreign minister. And he say practically that the invasion of Ukraine is not Russian fault, perhaps it was provoked by the president. So I'm just saying,
Stefano,
the question again,
it's
is
strike
the,
two.
the
I'm not going to start commenting on conversations, leaked tape conversations of, individuals. I'm just not. We have a very strong partnership with Italy, and we continue to look forward to that partnership. Michelle Nichols, I hear you're somewhere on the Ethernet.
Hello, Stéphane. I just wanted to follow up on what you were saying. I've just taken a quick glance at this note that you referenced from 2016. Are you suggesting that the Secretary General will not send UN experts to inspect these drones unless he receives an official request from the Security Council?
At this point, I'm not suggesting anything beyond what I've just said.
Did the Secretary General send experts to inspect the downed drones that were used in attacks on Saudi Arabia without an official request from the Security Council?
Again, I mean, the historical facts are the historical facts. You can look at the previous biannual reports, but at this point, I'm just not going to say anything more. Except we're all going to lunch, but before lunch, I'm going to lunch, but before lunch, Paulina is going to talk to you. Bon appétit.